6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be sharing about the last 2 minutes with MP Mazur. Minister Guilbeault called the wildfire in Jasper a success. Yet a third of the town was destroyed, thousands are homeless, and nearly $1 billion in damage. Did his failure to implement proper mitigation go against your job to prepare for this emergency?
So what I can tell you is when I visited Jasper, the command center, and the town itself, alongside with the mayor, the premier, and our ministers, and especially Minister Ellis, the briefing that we got, if it wasn't for the preparation that Jasper had taken, the Fire Smart program that was conducted, more importantly, the training and the coordinated training that all the different agencies had done, I think just a few months prior, that led to not only saving the town, but making sure that the evacuation was very successful and done quickly.
Okay. The wildfire in Jasper was a disaster waiting to happen, with experts and officials raising alarms for over 8 years. When were you first informed, either by Minister Guilbeault or any other member of the Liberal government, that Jasper was a tinderbox ready to ignite? When and by whom?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't agree with that assessment. When you look at across the country, British Columbia, Alberta, the forecast that we were seeing with the extreme heat, there were many parts of the country that we know, because of the extreme heat, is prone to wildfires. When did I first know of the wildfire that took place? It was just actually, I believe, a few days before that the evacuation took place. When we were informed, well, one thing we always make sure through the Government Operations Center to making sure that all the resources are in place, and do they have all that was needed, and everything that we were told at that time, additional resources were being moved in, and that things were being held at that time until those gusts of wind that I was talking about that made the situation extremely worse, that they have never happened apparently in Jasper before.
But Minister, I think you're forgetting the fact that, you know, the mountain pine beetle, there was a lot of dead trees. I'm not saying there wasn't fire smarting in town. Mm-hmm. The problem is the fire smarting wasn't done further back, like a mile or 2 miles. That's where the problem was. You had huge amounts of fuel sitting there, essentially dead trees that could ignite at any time. And yes, once that got fire started there, the problem was you were not going to stop it. That's our point, is why was those trees not removed? So, when and how were you informed that there should have been more done? So
as the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, my job is to look at responding to the emergency. What I'll tell you, what I was briefed upon when I was on the ground, I'll let Parks Canada and others explain further if they need to on this. When I was briefed is the fire smarting that actually took place, the wall of flame that was reported. If it wasn't for the fire smarting that was done, the wall of flame would have kept going. They actually would stop. It was because of those winds that had never taken place before, that 100 kilometers per hour, that gusted up to 150 kilometers per hour, that launched those pine cones that were on fire and branches into the town, that actually set the town on fire. But for everything that we were briefed on, that if it wasn't for the preparation that had taken place, that the situation would have been much worse.
Okay, I won't get into the severe winds in mountain areas, but I'll pass it on to MP Mazur.
Thank you. Minister, you're responsible for emergency preparedness. Do you agree with prescribed burns help prevent wildfires? Yes or no?
First, I'm not the expert on how to deal with that. That the experts would have to look at, because I have seen where certain places...
Minister, the question was pretty straightforward. Do you agree that prescribed burns help prevent wildfires? Yes or no?
It all depends on which area. Each expert, for example, in the Yukon...
Minister, I'll tell you, they do actually help. So, Minister, documents obtained by suggest that Minister Guilbeault's department was working against your mandate. A senior official at Parks Canada wrote in an email months before the Jasper wildfires, and I quote, "At what point do we make the organizational decision to cancel prescribed burns in Western Canada?" Then the official stated, and I quote, "Political perception may become more important than actual prescription windows." Minister, newly obtained emails now reveal that this discussion was so alarming, the Executive Director of Conservation replied, begging Parks Canada to put forest management above politics. And I quote, "I hope we don't get into a blanket shutdown," she said. Quote, "It is critical to continue those kind of burns. It is how they maintain the community fuel break, and when they fall behind, it is very difficult to catch up, end quote. So, Minister, when were you first informed that Minister Guilbeault's department was discussing cancelling prescribed burns because of political optics?
First of all, I think those questions were answered already earlier.
Je crois qu'on a déjà répondu à ces questions. Je vous posais la question à vous.
Minister, any opportunity to respond to his question.
I'm sensitive to the badgering of witnesses. I don't think it's really that severe in Mr. Mazur's case. Go ahead. Wait.
Je crois qu'il y a un petit problème dans la
OK,
traduction.
est-ce que vous comprenez? Est-ce qu'on entend? C'est bon? OK, alors, Monsieur Mazur, continuez, là, mais donnez la chance.
Please continue. Please continue.
I'll ask you again, Minister. When were you first informed that Minister Guilbeault's department was discussing cancelling prescribed burns because of political optics?
I can only tell you what I have been briefed on when I visited Jasper. I
So
deal
you
with
were-
the emergency
were you aware?
response. I don't get into what takes place in each community across the country.
Were you
we
aware?
look at responding. No, I wasn't.
Thank you. How much time?
15 seconds. 10 seconds.
I'm good.
Round.
Thank
And it's Mr. Lloyd who's leading off.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Your experience with disasters, Minister, you're a former military man. I'd like to get your perspective, and I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd like to get a direct answer. Knowing what you know now about what happened in Jasper, was it a mistake for the government not to conduct more mechanical clearing operations and more prescribed burns to protect the town site of Jasper?
What I can tell you and what I was briefed on the ground with the Premier and the Alberta Wildfire Service, that everything that could have been done was done. And I believe Mayor Ireland can attest to that.
I think you're avoiding the question here. I understand that Alberta Emergency Management of the town may have done everything they could have done in terms of fire smart, in terms of positioning emergency response equipment to react to a fire once it happened. But I'm asking about what happened before, in the years before the fire started, in the years since 2017 when Ken Hodges and other scientists warned your government that not taking action on mechanical clearing and prescribed burns to protect the town of Jasper was setting up the town of Jasper for a catastrophe. Knowing what you know now, Minister, and with your extensive experience, will you say whether or not it was a mistake for Parks Canada not to more extensively clear the forest and use prescribed burns to protect the town of Jasper?
The only thing I can tell you is what I have been briefed on when we were involved with the emergency, and what we were briefed on the ground with all the Alberta from the Premier and other ministers, that everything that could have been done was done. In fact, if the preparation hadn't taken place, that the whole town could have been lost.
Well, Minister, we could have avoided the town being burned down at all if we had taken extensive action to clear the dead pine beetles that scientists warned your government needed to be cleared in order to prevent the fire in Jasper. I'm asking you, Minister, one last time. You saw it with your own eyes. You saw what happened. Are you not willing to admit that clearing more forest and using more prescribed burns could have prevented the town of Jasper from being burned down?
So what we do is we'll be going through a lessons learned to determine what are the lessons that we can learn to be able to apply not only for that area, but for also the rest of the country as well.
Minister, it's pretty shocking that you won't give a direct answer to that question, but I will move on to my next question.
Point of order?
Hold my time, please.
Yes, Ms.
Yeah, I just find the member opposite, is being, questioning the minister's integrity by repeating that
That's not
question
true,
and
but
then
that's
saying
not a point of order.
Questioning that again. And it's Standing Order 18, by the way.
It's not a point of order. It's not a point of order, but
I appreciate the break, though. Thank you.
okay, let's continue, but let's be respectful, I guess. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll move on to my next question, Minister. You did talk about a time of reflection, and I think that is important, but we need not just to reflect, we need to take action. I've been told by scientists and people on the ground that the town of Jasper is still at significant risk, particularly to the northwest of town where there still is significant stands of pine beetle-infested dead pine trees that pose a significant risk to the town. What is Parks Canada doing immediately to prepare the town of Jasper to face this risk so that we don't have a repeat of what we had this last summer?
So because I can only answer for my portfolio, what I can tell you is we have learned from whether it's Fort McMurray, West Kelowna, enterprise, and we try to share those lessons. And we will be making sure that all the lessons that have been learned here will be applied not only to that area but for others. And what I have also been assured is looking at what else needs to be done. And this is one thing that I took away from Mayor Ireland, who's personally had to deal with the devastation of losing his own home, is the work that needs to be done. They have to do.
Minister, I'll have to cut you off because I've given you some time there. What needs to be done is we need to start clearing these trees, and we need to take action to prevent the fire from hitting Jasper and other towns in the Rocky Mountain National Park and our other national parks that are at risk. But I'll move on to my next question, Minister. You know, the way that you're speaking here at committee, I think it would be more appropriate if your ministry was the Ministry of Emergency Response, because I'm not seeing a lot of preparedness from your government. What role did you take in the years and the months leading up to this Jasper fire to prepare Jasper and other towns and national parks, which are under federal jurisdiction, for the threat of wildfires? You as Minister of Emergency Preparedness, what did you do?
So for our role in emergency preparedness, one of the things we do is look at on the prediction of where potentially fires can take place. We have made that information available as far as possible. The other aspect, one of the things we have prepared is making sure that evacuees need the support. That's one of the things that we also learned from last year, and the humanitarian workforce program played a very important role in that. When it comes to the preparedness side, that's a shared responsibility that happens with the provinces and the municipalities to be able to work together.
Thank you. I only have 30 seconds left, Minister. I have given you some good time to answer that. What day did Alberta make a request for assistance with Jasper? What day did the request for assistance come to you?
Well, the actual first request that was made was actually not for Jasper. We were actually.
I'm asking for the one for Jasper specifically, though, Minister.
But I need to, I'm trying to explain to you the actual how the situation took place. It wasn't just like a one moment and another. When I was on the phone with Minister Ellis throughout the day, we were actually looking at providing support for northern Alberta, while literally at the same time the situation in Jasper is deteriorating. So we didn't even look at where the resources were going. We were dealing with Jasper, and then the decision was made during my visit is to shift the resources, and that was their decision to make.
What day, Minister?
Thank you. Time's up. Time's up. I'm sorry.
22nd of July.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today. I just want to give you a heads up that I'm very familiar with Jasper National Park. So I'm going to be asking you some fairly specific questions. In your opening remarks, you said that there was, you left no stone unturned, the Government of Canada left no stone unturned when it came to preparing for the fire that happened that destroyed almost $1 billion worth of personal property, left a couple thousand people homeless, and actually resulted in the death of unfortunately, of a brave firefighter. I don't believe actually that that's statement that you made in your opening remarks is true.
Point of order.
Yes. Who called the point of order? Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Yeah, Standing Order 18 on order and decorum does say that remarks which question the member's integrity, including a minister, are not allowed. And I think that what that member just said directly questioned the minister's integrity.
Yeah, I would be okay. Well, you know, I wouldn't be maybe as direct, Mr. Calkins, about that, but you can go continue.
I suppose in the quest for the truth then, Minister, I take umbrage with the comment that you made. The no stone unturned comment is frustrating for me because I am acutely aware of efforts that have been made, and you referred to private sector partners. Are you aware, Minister, that private sector partners were actually en route to Jasper and were actually turned away from coming to do fire suppression in the town of Jasper?
Well, first of all, to your accusation there is wrong, because what I was talking about, no stone unturned, at that time I was talking about the emergency preparedness for the overall country. Well, let's explore Mr.
that.
Chair,
please,
I've been very polite and trying now. If I mean,
Mr.
Calkins,
I think I'm interested to know what the minister's answer
so
is.
I'm trying to clarify, if you're accusing me of something, what I was talking about is from previous wildfires. We've been trying to learn the lessons from there and trying to share those across the country. That's when it comes to no stone unturned, right? It's obviously impossible for us to look at every single community across the country. And when it comes to those resources, yes, I can assure you that that was not the case. I spoke directly with Minister Ellis about this, and that was not the case. When those concerns were actually raised, it was addressed on the ground during the actual visit itself. And all of us, and so the minister responsible for emergency preparedness, right, we were there when it said that this was not an actual issue. Any resources that were needed were made available and that were put to use by the incident commander as we were briefed.
Your comments also about saying that no fire team could have stopped it. If my allegation is actually true that fire suppression private sector partners were actually turned away en route to Jasper, how would you know if it wasn't, if these folks wouldn't have been able to stop it at all? They have a very clear track record. As a matter of fact, they're under contract with the province of Alberta. The province of Alberta would not have stopped this company from coming into Jasper. The fire started 4 days before it reached the town. It sat on somebody's desk because this company had years of negotiations with Parks Canada on fire suppression. They have mobile devices that can be deployed to this, and they have told me specifically that they were turned around. As a matter of fact, they show on the video the footage of the news where their fire suppression units were turned around. Minister, are you very sure in what you're telling me right now that no stone was left unturned and that nobody that could have prevented the fire in Jasper from destroying those buildings, nobody was turned away? Are you sure?
First of all, when it comes to the management of the fire, the incident commanders on the ground make the calls. And also, when I was with Minister Ellis, I think you also need to speak with Minister Ellis if you really want to be sure, because at the same time, he was also directly involved. So I would say that some of the accusations that you are making.
I used the word allegation,
sorry,
Minister.
my mistake.
If we're going to be nice to each other, it goes both ways.
My apologies. I take that back. No, that was looked at. That's one of the reasons why I actually went to Edmonton to work with Minister Ellis directly to making sure that if there were any confusion, it could be addressed very
what is it,
quickly.
Mr. Calkins?
No, I don't want to interrupt. I can do two things at once. I was listening to the minister. I was simply asking you how much time I have left.
Oh, okay, 45
please
seconds. Yeah.
One of the key things was we need to make sure that for example, what happens is there's a lot of requests that ends up coming. Incident commander on the ground is making decisions. What we needed to do is making sure that the Alberta Provincial Operations Center had the right people. We actually, that time speaking with Parks Canada, inserted people in their operations center so that the appropriate people can make the appropriate decision based on the resources on the ground.
Minister, will you undertake to provide to this committee all documents pertaining to the procurement of equipment as well as contracts with private sector partners relating to the fire suppression and mitigation in Jasper National Park since 2017?
But that is, just to clarify here, the province is in charge of the management of the resources. We provide resources in addition to Parks Canada.
The government of Alberta does not
and then
run
we also
parks,
provide. I'm just telling you what was taking place on the ground. And I'm sure Parks Canada can provide the appropriate information.
Will you undertake to make sure those documents are provided?
I can't give you that because I am the Minister of Emergency Preparedness, right? I don't have the authority to provide any of those type of work. We can only provide based on what my responsibility is.
So.
5 minutes.
Chair, Mr. Campbell, I'd like to start with our conversation last week you had with my colleague regarding that email exchange with two of your employees where one said, and I quote, "At what point do we make the organizational decision to cancel planned prescribed burns in Western Canada? As more and more media articles raise public concern, public and political perception may become more important than actual prescription windows," end quote. Have you since reviewed the entirety of those email exchanges since we chatted last week? Okay. Now, you claimed that at the time that email exchange was regarding a debate between mechanical clearing and prescribed burns, but we have a copy of the ATIP here, multiple pages, and there is no evidence to back up that statement. There's no mention of mechanical. That was to me, a very misleading statement. So I'd offer you first the opportunity to clarify now that you have read that particular transcript that was publicly released by the Environment Minister's office and explain what that possibly meant.
So it means exactly what I said. There was a discussion between them on two different approaches. one being mechanical and the other being prescribed. Just, Mr. Leslie, if you could.
I'll go ahead.
So, we had earlier in that day, or the day before, I need to, a meeting of my operations managers. And in that meeting of the operations managers, there was a discussion around the number of politicians at the local level, the number of articles across the country, and in every type of publication around the public saying that they were losing faith in people starting fires, prescribed burns. Just wait. So if we can finish, if I can finish though, on that, so that began the process. Then they had the discussion. I'll just ask you a question.
Please wrap it up.
Because the question
this is
might
not how
be
that works.
me.
You do not ask me questions. I
I
ask you
think there's a
questions.
bit of,
Mr. Campbell, the evidence, could you table the briefing, the minutes of that meeting, any
We don't
exchanges
take
on
minutes.
WhatsApp, Signal, any other platform that you use to try to
don't take
clarify
minutes.
the evidence? Because the
Point of order,
ATIP that
Mr.
we
Chair.
got
Okay, we're gonna
does
just
not
pause
back
here
up
for a
what you were
second.
saying
Point of
in
order,
any way,
Mr.
shape, or
Chair.
form.
we're just going to pause. This is getting a little too, argumentative. Yes, Mr.
My point of order pertains to hostility, which leads to unsafe working conditions for both translators and officials, as we've seen. A literal death threat came to a Canadian official, a government official, who are nonpartisan workers, by the way.
But I think I'm right now.
Nobody here is on trial. The work of these individuals
I just
saved
want to
lives.
focus on the health of the interpreters, because when there's intense arguing like that, and they can't hear, they can't interpret, and
Precisely.
probably it's not great for their hearing. Ms. Collins, you have a point of order too?
Yeah, I just want to raise, I really don't want to see any badgering of witnesses, but I do think it is important to acknowledge that the time that we have to question is our time. And so if the witnesses could just maybe be reminded that when a member is interrupting, it's often because we have a limited amount of time. And so if you could just pause and let us to jump in to redirect, as it is our time to ask the question.
I would agree with you, Ms. Collins, but also I think the witness has to be given an opportunity to answer the question. But anyway, so why don't we try again? So I'll restart the clock. I don't know where we were. Was it Mr. Campbell who was answering, or Mr. Leslie that was asking?
Mr. Leslie can.
Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I'll pick up where I left off, because I'll get into the quotes from the ATIP that was released publicly by your department to the public. This is not some sort of nefarious thing that we've unleashed. It was publicly released under ATIP, under access to information, and it was regarding political purposes. But one participant in that debate disagreed, and they said, I quote, "I hope we don't get into a blanket shutdown. Prescribed burns are important for both ecological and risk reduction reasons." End quote. And it gets better. That employee said, "It is critical to continue those kinds of burns when Parks Canada falls behind. It is, quote, very difficult to catch up." So I'll ask a very straightforward question. Did you ever inform the minister that one of your employees, or perhaps a group of you in a closed-door meeting without minutes or notes, was contemplating ending prescribed burns due to political perceptions as per this ATIP?
Nope.
You did not inform the minister of that, so he had no chance of knowing that Parks Canada was unilaterally making these decisions.
So, again, a discussion. So it came up, and the question that I would love to answer is, did we cancel a single prescribed burn in that year? Because the answer is no.
Well, here's the question I'd like to ask then. Did you, in your view, do enough prescribed burns?
Mr. Campbell,
Est-ce que, appel au règlement.
Point of order. Please, would it be possible, through the chair, yes, chair, would it be possible for my colleague, Mr. Leslie, to take a deep breath and let the witness answer? Yes, the witness answered. So Mr. Leslie has the floor once again. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
Well, I will take a deep breath. Thank you to my colleague across the way. And I'll ask for a yes or no answer. Do you think it's appropriate that Parks Canada consider giving greater weight to political perceptions as opposed to the proven science when it comes to protecting communities from devastating burns like we saw in Jasper?
No.
It is not appropriate that you are weighing political decisions? Is that an accurate assessment?
It is not appropriate that we would weigh a political decision more than science.
So why did you?
Question you asked.
Why did you?
We didn't, because we continued with all of the prescribed burns that we had planned.
Do you think
Full
you did?
stop.
Did Parks Canada undertake an adequate number of prescribed burns, and in addition to mechanical removal of dead wood that for 8 years has been notified to the departments of Parks Canada that it is a huge problem, that it is a tinderbox waiting to explode. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Do you think, honestly, with a straight face, that Parks Canada did enough in the lead up to prevent this from happening?
So, did we take every prescribed burn in every year in every burn window that we had available to us since 2014? Absolutely.
Do you think it was enough?
Did we do mechanical removal to $6.4 million in and around the cut blocks around Jasper during the prior to 2024? Yes, we did that. So your next question was, was it enough?
Yes.
So it's always hard to say, and I will say this, that it is ever enough. We do as much as we can in the control windows that you have. So there is.
Could you do more if you had more funding?
Okay, time's
Is there a
up.
lack
Time's
of funding
up.
available?
Thank you, Chair. So my question will be for Parks Canada. My colleague, Mr. Leslie, was just asking about the emails, and we had a conversation about this last week. If what you're saying is true, Mr. Campbell, why is there no record of any discussion of mechanical removal of trees in any of that information that this committee or that we've received through the Access to Information request? It would only seem reasonable to me, because I'm a former Parks Canada, Alberta Parks. I've worked for the public service most of my life prior to becoming a member of Parliament. I know exactly how these conversations go. Why, if what you're saying is true, then it should be clearly outlined in a document. Why is it not in the document? If you say that it's about mechanical removal, there is nothing here that suggests to me that any conversation at all was happening about mechanical removal.
So I guess you'll have to look at what was in discussion at that time at Parks Canada. And I think if you look, we always have a number of different techniques that we will employ. And that's what, in fact, so what you read in the second email, or what Mr. Leslie read in the second email, was from the head of the fire group, Tamini Snaith. And at that time, Dr. Snaith had said that, in fact, we wouldn't be looking at that. And so, you know, for Darlene and myself,
I want to hone in on one part of that conversation.
Yep.
And the sentence is really, really important because we were just talking about fire breaks. It's critical to continue those kinds of burns. It is how they maintain the community fire break. When they fall behind, it's very difficult to catch up.
So it is one of the methods of the fire break, community fire break. I think we can all agree mechanical is also another method for creating fire breaks. So what Dr. Snaith was saying was that we were still going to move ahead, and that was the advice that came up to Darlene and myself, that we would continue, and that is what we agreed to, is that we would continue to do that. Now, just if I can just, for 1 second, just give one slight piece of context. Is the individual that sent that, just to come back to another MP's question, was somebody who had been evacuated for 4 weeks the year before, had just gone through a town council meeting with Fort Smith, and where, at the meeting, they questioned whether we should still be doing prescribed burns. So that's the political pressure he is discussing.
But the reality is we've got $1 billion worth of assets burnt in town. The fire breaks did not work. The prescribed burn conversation is very clear that there was political considerations and factors involved.
So can I just
let me. I haven't even asked my question yet, Mr. Campbell. So, so I mentioned this earlier when Minister Guilbeault was before here. The Excelsior fire Had the wind blown the other way, it would have come right down the Moline Valley, and you would have had this problem 10 years earlier. The pine beetle infestation is leaving most of that, virtually every pine tree in Jasper National Park is standing dead dry firewood. It burns fiery hot. To say that you've never seen or couldn't expect a fire of this magnitude, when somebody says that, I call BS. That's simply not true. You ought to know. Everybody knows. The people that live there know. People who live in the woods know. People who start campfires know that a dry, standing, dead tree is exactly what you go and look for. And to suggest and to hear people say that we've never seen trees blow down in a national park before, that's simply not true. I've rode my horse to the North Boundary Trail in Jasper National Park.
Can I stop?
Point of order. When you use rather vulgar words, the interpretation is not easy. Go ahead, Mr. Calkin.
It's simply not true. I was a North Boundary warden in Jasper in 1995. I rode through the Wellborn blowdown. Swaths of trees all blown down in the same direction. Winds go through the mountain parks. They howl through the mountain parks. They howl through the mountain valleys. So to suggest that you don't know that the wind is going to push the fire is simply not true. And I've got several examples of private sector companies that have been in discussions and could have provided relief to the town, and they were ordered, either turned around or ordered to leave town instead of providing fire protection. So I want to know, Mr. Campbell, if you will, I asked the previous minister if he was going to be able to do this, but will you undertake to provide to this committee all documents pertaining to the procurement of equipment, private contractors, as well as anybody involved in fire suppression planning for Jasper National Park since 2017, and will you provide it to this committee within the next 2 weeks?
We're way over time. We'll go to Mr. Long. Sorry, Mr. Leslie. Okay, Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to continue on a couple of topics that we touched on. Firstly, my colleague, Mr. Calkins here. Mr. Campbell, it was asked about you, both private firefighting services and whether or not they were allowed, more or less, to enter. And so I will be tabling another witness because we have received some really interesting information from the president of the Arctic Fire Safety Services, which I hopefully you are engaged with, because there are some incredible accusations regarding Parks Canada's denial of their ability to enter the premise, particularly Park Warden Scott Murphy from Parks Canada, preventing them and suggesting that they would be escorted out or arrested if they were coming into work. So firstly, are you familiar with this company at all?
Absolutely not.
Okay, I look forward to having him join us as a witness so we can hear a little bit more about that. But going back to some of these emails that you are so firmly confident you're either out of context or you can't provide any other context to them, would you be willing to table any conversations written down in any way that do back up the claim that of what happened behind this closed-door meeting? Could you table something that would alleviate my concern that this was, in fact, about political pressure, not about a debate of mechanical use or prescribed burns? Is there anything you could provide me to ease my mind?
I don't know what could ease your mind, and we do not take notes at my operations team meeting. Full stop. I couldn't provide it for any meeting. We have one today. I have no notes.
Interesting. Before a prescribed burn is carried out, who has the sign-off? You mentioned the numbers. Who actually signs off on that at the ground level, and what is the time frame in that sign-off?
So there's prescriptions are written for prescribed burns. So there's the planning at the beginning of the year. Then there's the actual planning that kind of happens, and there's a sign-off. But the day of, it's signed off locally based on the local factors, just to ensure that all the conditions are met for the prescribed burn. So it's signed off very soon before it's actually undertaken.
Since Minister Guilbeault has been appointed, are you aware of any times that he's asked specifically to understand the use of prescribed burns in Jasper and or any other national parks? Or has he been directly briefed on the repeated warnings since 2017 on the tinderbox waiting to burn? Has he been directly briefed, or is this documents that has made it to his office? Does he have deniability that he's seen them, or has he actually been directly briefed?
During the fire season, the minister's staff are briefed regularly on the status, I assume.
But they were aware of the repeated warnings of the tinderbox that was the Deadwood in Jasper National Park.
I can't speak to that.
So you don't think that was worthy of the minister's awareness?
that situation is replicable in a lot of places in Canada. It's
Okay, I'm going to change directions here. There was a Blacklock's article that came out in August where the department refused to provide a piece of information that I'm hoping can be tabled whether through Parks Canada and or ECCC, and that relates to how many hectares of dead pine are now left standing in Jasper National Park. I understand that there was small amounts of prescribed burns that have 1,700 acres, some mechanical removals, a hectare, sorry, 2.5, right? I'd like to know how much is left now. I'm sure we have the technology to do a reasonable assessment. I don't need a specific number, but you wouldn't release that to the media in August. Will you table it with the committee so we can have a real understanding? Our emergency response minister, instead of preparedness, should probably be aware of how much deadwood still exists. Is that information that you could share with this committee within the next week?
Yeah, 15 seconds. I'm really going to run the clock tight right now, but.
I'm not sure if we have what you ask in that time frame.
That seems like a problem to me.
No.
That's not a problem?
No.
Interesting. Is it Mr. Leslie for 4 minutes? Yeah, go ahead.
Chair, I would just like to pick up on the last question I had there regarding an assessment of the remaining deadwood. Would Parks Canada, are you planning to undertake that assessment?
Yeah, thanks for going back to that question. So yes, and we manage a lot of land. So we do fire management planning for all the sites that have fire risk. And the focus of some of the more detailed work is in the areas of where our high values are. So we're very focused on values at risk, and that informs the planning. It informs where we invest in prescribed burns, mechanical, and just the planning in general.
So how long, and Mr. Campbell, can I get you to commit that once this is completed, how long will it take for this assessment to be completed? And can this committee have that assessment table to understand the risk of deadwood remaining after this tragedy?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, sorry.
How long will the assessment take, and when can this committee expect to receive a tabling of that information so we can understand the risk? From the Northwest, as my colleague that represents that region pointed out, that there is still a severe risk to the area, and I understand that there needs to be a fulsome assessment done. How long will that take, and when can the committee receive that information?
Yeah, I can't answer that question at the moment. But
okay, I'll pivot then. Mr.
Sorry,
Campbell.
if I can, though, I think we would be more than happy to give the Jasper fire plan and the fire prevention plan that we have for Jasper and the resources.
I'd like to know specifically about the deadwood.
It's online.
I appreciate that you can point me to a website.
Yep.
I'm going to pivot a little bit here. Going back to what I mentioned about the private security, I understand that you are not familiar with the specific company, Arctic Fire Safety Services, but reading through this email, it is pretty remarkable that there's 20 fire trucks and 50 firefighters that were denied entry. Will you commit to doing a full investigation of how on earth, when resources are being deployed with all of the equipment necessary to help suppress a major fire catastrophe, why that would happen and what operations need to change within Parks Canada to prevent them from being denied entry into the park?
I could say two things on that, and I don't have knowledge of the situation, but resource requests come via CIFC. We work with them because there's protocols and controls on that. And there's also time element potentially to this. I don't know.
Yeah, it looks like they were delayed about 3 days getting entry. My question is, will there be an investigation so we can better understand, and we report that information back to this committee so we can better understand how that could happen and how it could be prevented, lessons learned for the future?
There is always lessons learned and after action reviews on any major fires that we have. So there absolutely will be something, and we will look to learn lessons on that, and we can take a look at what that situation was.
Okay, because in my view, people have talked about our great public officials doing great work. The people on the ground that were fighting that fire are the heroes. That was an incredibly, hearing those stories from on the ground through Gawk, things like that, it was a devastatingly difficult fire. My point, I think our point, is that it didn't need to be that devastating. The real hero is Morgan Kitchen, who lost his life fighting that fire. These are the real heroes on the ground, and we should all have the utmost respect for the work they are doing. We had the Minister of Emergency Preparedness come here and tell us about emergency response. They need to change the name of that department if they are going to truly become preparing for emergencies. It was extremely disappointing. My entire concern is with Parks Canada having the lack of humility to say, maybe we could have done a little bit better. Maybe we could have prevented the high level of heat burning through that forest. And just admitting that we can do better, although politically not a great attribute of the current government, I expect that our officials can say, you know what, not just lessons learned, have a little humility and say we could have done better, and just take a little bit of responsibility.
We'll go to Mr. Van